Hello and welcome to Elena Meets the Author. This podcast explores how authors create a world that we can escape into. Join me as we demystify the magic that keeps us turning the page. Hello and welcome to Elena Meets the Author. Today, I'm speaking to New York Times bestselling author Allison Pataki about her 11th book, It Girl. A fast-paced, immersive, and gripping historical novel about America's very first influencer. Before there was Taylor, Madonna, or Marilyn, there was Evelyn Nesbit, a luminous, stunningly beautiful, and hardworking young woman who went from rags to riches at the turn of the 19th century. Pataki, I'm just thinking I said young woman, but actually she was a girl. We'll get into that later. Pataki's story follows Nesbit's meteoric rise from hardscrabble roots, living with her widowed mother and younger brother in a Pittsburgh boarding house in the late 1800s, to supporting her family as an artist's model in Philadelphia at the age of 13, and then on to dynamic New York City, where at just 16 years of age, Evelyn takes Broadway by storm and is dubbed America's Eve. Her looks, talent, and allure attracts the attention of many admirers, but in particular, two very powerful men. Manhattan architect Stanford White, who designed many of the city's iconic buildings, and Pittsburgh millionaire playboy Harry Thaw, leading to the murder of the century. Pataki's terrific novel is mostly based on historical records, but given that it's a work of fiction, she changes the name of primary characters and gives Evelyn agency in a world where women had next to none. Pataki's author's note is a must-read once you finish the book, and I will try hard not to have any spoilers in this interview. Allison, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Before we get on to the book, It Girl, I'd love to learn more just about you and your passion for writing. You've written 11 books in 14 years. And on your About page, you say that you love books, reading them, writing them, and talking about them. And you quote your 100-year-old grandmother telling you that as long as she has books, she will never be lonely. Was she a big influence on your writing career?
She was a huge influence. Both my grandmothers were, actually, because they were the two master storytellers of my childhood and my youth. And they were just so readily willing to share stories of their own fascinating lives. You know, one grandmother was a French war bride in Morocco at World War II. My other grandmother was like the child of immigrants through Ellis Island who lived through the Great Depression and World War II. And just, they both lived these epic lives. And so I learned from master storytellers, which was the two of them.
Wow, fantastic. And then, after graduating cum laude at Yale, you became, I think, a newspaper reporter in New York City, writing fiction at night and on the weekends until you finally made the switch to full-time author in 2012. Can you tell us where you get your ideas from? Because you've written about everything from an Austro-Hungarian empress to American heiress Marjorie Merriweather Post, and now to It Girl,
Yes.
Evelyn Nesbit.
Yes. Well, the one thing I'll say is I was writing live television news, not newspapers. So it was the newsroom at ABC News. And it was very stressful because if you have a typo and you're writing a book, you have a few chances to proofread. If you have a typo and you're writing live television, it makes it on air, you're in big trouble. But yes, it was a transition from, I knew I wanted to write news. I knew I wanted to write. I loved news. I loved history. I loved storytelling. So I thought that the newsroom was the place I wanted to write. But it turns out I actually wanted to be writing fiction and novels and spending a lot longer in investigating these stories than just throwing them up on live TV. It's just a very different form of writing. It's just a better fit for me with novels. But every character that I've written about, every woman, true historical woman, has been a totally organic process of discovery. And my agent is a saint because she has jumped centuries with me. As you said, we've been, covering the Habsburgs at the dawn of World War I. I've written about Benedict Arnold's wife at the American Revolution, Marjorie Merriweather Post, the heiress of the 20th century, America's Empress, and now Evelyn Nesbit, It Girl, which is the dawn of the 20th century and the first iconic showgirl. And each time I have this moment where I stumble upon this morsel about this true woman who lived and was on the front lines of history, not only witnessing it, but shaping it. And I have this moment of, oh, I want to read a historical fiction novel about this woman. Oh, there isn't a historical fiction novel about her. Why don't we know more about her? And I feel outraged that I've never heard about this woman. And then I have this moment of delight where I'm like, I get to write this book. I get to be the person to tell this woman's story. So with Evelyn Nesbit, my way into finding about her was I was really intrigued by the Gibson girls, the art of the Gibson girls at the dawn of the 20th century. My mother had images of the Gibson girls up on her bedroom. And I was just so taken with these images of these women with these beautiful piles of hair. Like if you've watched The Gilded Age, you can think of that era, the beautiful dresses. And then they'd be doing these mundane things like washing their hands or riding their bicycles. And people I knew didn't dress like that and do their hair like that to wash their hands or ride their bicycles. So I was so intrigued by these images. And my mother just made the offhand comment, oh, well, if you think the Gibson girls are cool, you should look into the real Gibson girl, the model who had a tragic life and full of drama. And she got pulled into this crime of the century. And she just touched on a few of the broad strokes. Stanford White, famed architect, shot and killed on Madison Square Garden, the rooftop. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I am so intrigued by this life story. I've never heard of her. I need to know more.
I know. It's amazing that I'd never heard of her.
I know.
Or very vaguely, like the name, but I didn't attach anything to her.
Right.
So I'm glad that you've brought her. And now I've done more of a deep dive on Stanford White, and what a nasty character.
Yeah. History is stranger than fiction, and all the raw material of great stories is right there in the history books. And it's just a matter of telling these stories and lifting these women from the footnotes and putting them center stage, because gosh, I love historical fiction for exactly that. We can learn a thing or two. It can send us down those deep dives, as you said, but it can also be so entertaining and transportive.
Exactly. And because it's entertaining, we're going to read it.
Yes.
Whereas we might not read a history book.
You might not. Yeah.
Quick pause if you're enjoying this conversation. I've started an exciting optional paid newsletter called Behind the Stories. It curates the most inspiring insights from the podcast, and it's also where subscribers can get an early peek into upcoming guests and be involved in the conversations before episodes are recorded. It's a way to support the show and not miss what's coming next. You'll find the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode. One of the things I loved about your novel is your descriptions of New York City at the turn of the century. It's like a whole character. Can you tell us what the city was like then?
Oh, I love that you said that, because I really did think of New York City as a character in this book, because Evelyn was such a product of her time and her place. And she started from these humble origins in Sooty City, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, but she gets pulled to New York because of her rising star as an artist muse and model. And she quickly becomes a Broadway star. And when we are in New York at the dawn of the 20th century, it is this moment in time where everything feels new and fresh and bold. And you've got this young new president, Teddy Roosevelt. You've got this new technology like electricity and the automobile and the camera and the rise of mass media and Broadway as this new industry that's rising up. And the fainting sort of staid, corseted moments of the Victorian age and of the Gilded Age, where the who's who of society is determined by Mrs. Astor and the 400 closest friends of hers who she can fit in her one ballroom, is sort of giving way to this new moment in time where for the first time you have these young women who are being written about in the society pages, who are gathering the attention and interest of culture and society, not because they are the debutantes and brides of the Vanderbilts and the Astors, but because they are the working girls who are independent, self-made, making money, and they're working as artists' muses and models and Broadway stars. And so Evelyn sort of rises to the top of this new crew of young ladies who are coming to New York and sort of shaking things up. And she becomes known as the It Girl, the Gibson Girl, the sort of iconic face of this moment in time.
Do you have any idea what these 400 thought the women in particular, thought of these showgirls?
Oh, I think it was probably deliciously scandalous. And so I write this scene in It Girl where Evelyn is invited to one of Mrs. Vanderbilt's balls, because there were real moments in her life that were similar to this. And she's invited to dance as Salome. And so there's this very fine line between she's the celebrity in the room. She's the one they're all watching. She's the one that's getting paid to be there. But there's this fine line between her star power and just her being there and being exploited for their entertainment. You know, she's not one of them. She's not of their world. But then she gets pulled into their world when these characters like Stanford White and Harry Thaw and Charles Gibson and James Carroll Beckwith all seek her out and want her company and want her time and want to put her on this pedestal. And so it's this very, very interesting liminal moment where she's not of that world, but she is certainly a force in this world.
Right. Yeah, you say that she has to, she's dancing in this incredibly beautiful ballroom and everyone's watching her, and then she's going to go back to her
boarding house.
Her boarding house that she shares a bed, maybe still with her mother.
Yes. But of course, every girl in America at this point wants to look like her, wants to fashion their hair like her, wants to dress like her, wants to read about her, and every man wants to be with her. And so she was she was the first of that kind who kind of broke open this new mold of what it meant to be an it girl, what it meant to be a star, or this new concept of celebrity. Today we'd call them influencers. She was the first of that kind before Taylor Swift, before Marilyn Monroe, before Madonna, as you said. She was the girl.
Yeah. I wonder if they felt threatened by her. If I was a woman, I might feel a little bit threatened. Like,
possibly
who is this new class?
Yeah, threatened, certainly intrigued, certainly like she was different, right? She was another specimen. She was from Pittsburgh. She rose up on singing and dancing on a Broadway stage. Their daughters would not do that, But as Evelyn says, every showgirl backstage got to that backstage dressing room of that theater because something happened in her life that she wasn't expecting to happen. Because had Evelyn followed a trajectory that one would have called, quote unquote, like her normal expected life, she would have been in school. She was a girl still. She was 16. She should have been in school. But things happened in her life in such a way that her story took unexpected swerves that she did not anticipate.
Now I was going to ask you if you could read your prologue.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm going to grab my copy of It Girl, which a reader brought to me at book club and bedazzled the cover.
Oh, wow. That is beautiful.
And so this is my fancy copy that I'm going to read from. The prologue of It Girl. Now, a lot of the language was pulled from true writings about what would become known as the crime of the century. And then I wove it together to write this article to sort of set the stage for us. And it is the New York Telegraph, July 4th, 1906. It's a long way from Millionaire's Row to Murderer's Row, but the Playboy killer has booked himself passage, surrendering his freedom on the same day that the rest of the country celebrates independence. Will Hal Thorne's final suite be the barred cell he now occupies in the Tombs prison? Or even more chilling a thought to ponder, is the dreaded Tombs just a stop on the millionaire's way to the electric chair? What or who is the cause of it all? Love, that's right. There's a beautiful face at the center of this deadly dance, belonging to none other than America's Cinderella, the doll who now bears the nickname the Girl Houdini, after last night's fatal shooting that rocked Manhattan high society. In addition to the Playboy killer and the It Girl, the Telegraph has now learned the identity of the third character in this dark drama, and it's the boss of Fifth Avenue himself, the famous and sometimes infamous Stanley Pierce, who also loved the girl beauty. Everyone loved Evelyn Talbot, the so-called mistress of millions, who soared to stardom with an allure that made her Broadway's most feted beauty, the nation's prettiest peach, our modern-day Helen of Troy, the enchanting Eve of our very own Big Apple. But what would Miss T of the famous face think of this fatal face-off between the two men who loved her? Given how events have turned out, it's unlikely that anybody will ever know. And then we have an ellipsis. And then that's what they wrote. That's what they read. That's what they talked about. Talked about so much that President Teddy Roosevelt himself had to step in, asking his pals at the papers to give it a break and let my poor, beautiful body rest in peace. Oh, I got my peace all right. I even got a laugh as I read the ink they spilled, recounting the shocking details of my death, the tragedy of my too short life, the dangerous perfection of each one of my curves and curls. But it's not a new story, is it? They call me Eve, but I'm not the first of that name. Wasn't it Eve's fault that Adam ate the apple way back in that first garden? Or Helen's for having the face that launched all those ships? Salome's sins that cost men their heads? And Cleopatra's cunning that brought down the Roman rulers? I didn't make it as far in school as I'd have liked, but even I know that it's a story as old as storytelling itself. Men blaming women for the wars they wage on one another, for the wars they wage on themselves. The crime of the century, they're calling it. Just put in a new beautiful face, a new batch of hapless men, oftentimes a snake or a sword for flair. This time it's a pistol and a fatal performance. She drove him mad. She drove him to do it. He loved her. He wanted to honor her, protect her, save her. She's the cause of it all. Stories written by the men, all of them. And the problem here is that it's not the truth. At least it's not the truth as I lived it. And it's my story. So what about my ending? They always talked about my eyes, how they were too big and too deep and too dark and too haunting. They drive a man mad. Well, how about I tell you what it felt like to see it all with those eyes? Because the truth, I remember it rather as something more like this. And then we go back many years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's such a good book. It's so fast paced. It's got so much Evelyn, her life in those few years. There's just so much change.
Yes.
And she changes.
Yes, she does.
She changes. And I like that whole analogy to swimming.
Yes. Yes.
That quote. Can you talk about how you empowered her with?
Yes. So when Evelyn comes to New York, she's almost being like recruited to superstardom because she has been working for several years at this point as an artist's muse and a model in Philadelphia. And she quickly became a huge sensation. She became too big for Philadelphia and she was ready to swim in a bigger pond. And so she goes to New York with her body of work and references from the artists with whom she's worked in Philadelphia. And she gets to New York and she's given letters of introduction that open the doors to some of the biggest artists in New York. And so she quickly becomes the most desirable muse and model in New York. And so she's working with James Carroll Beckwith, Charles Dana Gibson, the Gibson Girls, Frederick Church. And it's Charles Dana Gibson who draws the iconic image of her, where he frames her in profile with her thick, luscious hair that everybody loved her hair. And he makes it look like a ponytail. And he calls the piece of work around her Woman, the Eternal Question. And the irony of this is that she was not a woman at all. She was a teenage girl. But this image went viral. This became like the image of the new century. That's why Evelyn was known as the Gibson girl. And Charles Dana Gibson sees how quickly her star is rising. And he knows the forces that are at play, swirling around this beautiful, vulnerable young woman who is really being thrown to the wolves. And he just gives her this vague sort of ominous warning where he tells her, think of it like water. Think of it as if you have to learn how to swim. You have to move with the water. You have to harness the power of the water to keep afloat in this current. It's like a storm that is rising about her. And that is something that the well-meaning artists around her know and give her these vague warnings the whole time, where they're always saying things like, I hope you'll thank me and not curse me, because they know they have gold on their hands in her. They know she is fated for this meteoric rise. And nobody knows how this is going to end, least of all Evelyn. But the artists are a bit older and have been around the block a little bit longer to see that this is not going to be an easy road for her. So Gibson gives her this sort of vague, illusory analogy of learn how to swim, learn how to harness the water, learn to adapt with this huge wave that's coming, because it can either pull you under or you can learn how to use it for your own good and ultimately rise above it. And so then this water imagery comes back to Evelyn multiple times throughout her life. And eventually she has to learn how to find her own agency and stand up against forces that seem so much more powerful than her in terms of social power, financial power, age, wealth, connections, everything that's sort of stacked against her. She has to learn to rise above all of this. And so we keep coming back to this metaphor of either you learn to swim or you get pulled under. Another thing that the Showgirls in Evelyn's company say is either learn the ropes or you hang trying. And it's sort of this on the job, quick learning in order to not only survive, but hopefully get yourself where you need to go.
Interesting. At the very beginning, when she became a showgirl, when they printed the playbill.
Yes. Yes.
She
and they
showed
don't call her by her name. They call her Flossie the Fuss. And that's true. That is from the history. Evelyn was so outraged that she's making her Broadway debut and she's so excited and she's worked so hard for this moment. And she sees on opening night, she's not in the playbill. And she has a moment in the show, like her name should be in the playbill. And she finds that they've given her the name Flossie the Fuss. And so she speaks up for herself and she says, no, you will call me by my name. And that's one of the first moments where we see her standing up for herself and giving herself a voice.
Yeah, because she was clever.
And she's in a man's world. She's in a man's world, no doubt about it.
So would you draw some parallels between then and now?
Oh, there are so many echoes of this story. So while I'm working on this book, Taylor Swift is on the Eras Tour, taking over the world, and then puts out this album, The Life of a Showgirl. And I felt like some of the lyrics of that song in particular, The Life of a Showgirl, she paid her dues with every bruise. She knew what to expect. She took her pearls of wisdom and hung them from her neck. I'm like, Evelyn's soul could be speaking through these words. Right. But what we have in Taylor Swift is like a corrective version where you have a woman who is empowered, who is a boss, who is standing up to the father figures, who is the ruler of her own empire, which is like the version that you'd want to see for every woman entertainer and just woman in general. So Taylor Swift is like the correction of everything we see that happened a century ago to Evelyn. But Evelyn was the first iconic showgirl. And so you have a through line from Evelyn to Marilyn Monroe, to an Elizabeth Taylor, to a Madonna, to a Taylor Swift, where you have these young, beautiful girls, childhood stars, who to varying degrees, it's obviously different with each case, are sort of thrown to the wolves because of this superstar power that they have, this talent and charisma and drive and ambition. And then this meteoric rise. And then what happens when you achieve fame and it's not necessarily always just a happy ending. And so that was a trope that played out for Evelyn so often too, is that she was always being called America's Cinderella, but it's like a poisoned Cinderella story where she realizes there is no Prince Charming who is coming to ride in and save me for my ending here. The only way I'm going to get this happy ending is if I write this myself.
Yeah. And what's funny when you bring up Taylor Swift, every time a guy breaks up with her, she uses it and creates an amazing song.
Yes. You know, I love ruminative Taylor. I love melancholy Taylor. I love fun, spunky Taylor. But I think I like fierce Taylor the most. I think those songs are the most empowering when she uses her pain to make really fierce art.
And you're a Swiftie, clearly.
I'm a Swiftie and I'm a girl mom. I've got 3 daughters. You know, it's like the soundtrack of our life. And also, what I love about Taylor Swift is I can sit with a song that I've heard a million times and find new things in the lyrics each time. Like, I just picked up on that new, for the first time, I just noticed the Shakespeare reference in there. Or, you know, there's so much depth to her lyrics. She's really a brilliant storyteller. These are really, really compelling stories, each song.
Fascinating. Yeah. Like another storyteller, but in verse or in song. Yeah. What was the hardest part about writing this book?
Yeah. So, you know, as a mother to young girls and as a woman myself, there were pieces of this story that were very dark and it was true history. So I had to go there. And, you know, by modern terminology, we would have the language to call out some of these things that are love bombing, grooming, abuse. But for Evelyn at the dawn of the 20th century, in her world and in her moment in time, this was common practice, what was going on. If you were a beautiful, young, vulnerable girl making it as an artist or a performer or a model or a muse or a Broadway star, this was just kind of quote unquote how things were done. And Evelyn spoke about it very candidly in her memoirs later in life. So I had the raw material. I knew what Evelyn said happened and what, the papers said happened. And so I found it to be really hard and tragic to see, not only was this the story of this one woman's life, but to see the way this plays out time and again. And not only in her life, but even in today's culture, the way you see women being exploited. And so it's interesting. Yeah, like I don't choose my subject matter and the women I'm writing about because everything goes well and they have happily ever after lives and things are perfect and they're happy and they have no problems. I choose the women I choose because they have hardship and adversity. And in each one of those moments of difficulty, there's an invitation to grow and evolve and overcome. And so that's what's compelling to me. So you have to go through the dark to get to the light. And so there were moments that were hard for me to sit with.
I can imagine. I mean, God, those men. Yeah. But it makes me think of, if you think of, Harvey Weinstein, but with Epstein,
yes,
only one woman, I think, has been arrested.
Yeah, well,
right?
And
in the U.S.
Yeah. And that was very much happening in the news as I was working on this story, and is still happening as, we're talking about this story. So the echoes today are still shocking and appalling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And on a brighter note, what was the most fun part about writing this book?
Two things. Engaging with New York City as the setting, because this was like we watched them celebrate the dawn of the 20th century. We watched them celebrate New Year's into the new century. And that was just a really exciting moment in time. And I had never written a book set in that time period. So I really enjoyed kind of trying to capture the kinetic, fast-paced energy of that moment and Evelyn rising up sort of as the product of this time. And then the other piece that was really fun for me is I was an English major in college. I really love old stories. Like I love Greek mythology. I love the Old Testament of the Bible. I love Shakespeare. I love Chaucer. I was that weird English major at Yale that there was a requirement where you had to take courses with a certain number of courses that were from before certain dates, because nobody wanted to go before like the 20th century or whatever it was. Right. And I was that weird person who was like hanging out in the Chaucer and Shakespeare and Spencer and Milton and Greek mythology classes. I love an old story. And so what was so fun for me was to see how this trope of the dangerous beauty or the lethal beauty, as I read in the prologue, the cause of it all was her nickname with an uppercase C, how women have been blamed in storytelling since storytelling was invented, going back to Adam and Eve, going back, Helen's, that face was just too beautiful. It launched all those ships, or, Cleopatra brought down the Roman Empire, or Eve brought down the human race, or, Salome brought down the kingdom.
We made them crazy.
It's just where the woman is just a little too beautiful and a little too powerful, and that makes her dangerous, and it makes her a threat to the men, and it causes the wars between the men. And Evelyn played that role on the stage, and as a model, she was constantly posing as Helen of Troy or Cleopatra or dancing as Salome. And then she gets cast in that role in real time, in real life, where the newspapers pit her in between these men, where she gets labeled as the lethal beauty who caused these men to go to war with each other. And so she's watching life imitate art. And I had a really fun time with giving my Evelyn the chance to use that and to harness that and to sort of pull herself out of this role of pawn in this story and become the puppet master. And so I really enjoyed that because, what I do is I try to lift women from the footnotes or the shadows and of history. And so it was fun to sort of give Evelyn that agency because I was like, you know what? This version of the story is kind of like rinse and repeat. It's her fault. She caused the men for their, blame the bad behavior on them. I was like, let's see if she can rise above that and use that to then tell her own story.
Yeah, I love that. You referred a lot that she was playing a part. She knew she was playing a part.
Yes.
And then at the, later on in the book, she has to play the biggest part of her career.
Yeah, she's got to pull off the act of a lifetime.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. So you finished the book. Are you now working on something else? You haven't had any time because you're touring?
I know I am. I'm working on the next one because, these books, we edit them and then they go into production and it takes 9 months to make the physical book. So in that moment, I call it book lag. It's like jet lag for authors. But I'm like, okay, I'm switching centuries, switching places, characters. But I have my next book and I am so excited. It's another historical fiction inspired by an incredibly fascinating, true woman from history. We're still in America and we're still in the 20th century, but we're coming forward a few years till about mid-century. And I guarantee you everyone knows her name, but I would venture to guess that very few know the full extent of her legacy and how she impacted our culture and our lives. Ooh. And I can share it very soon. And I'm very excited and I'm obsessed with her. Because, you get in that moment where like you've met your next book and you've met your next heroine and then she's just taking up residence in your head. And so it's time to just write the story and get it out.
And was it easy for you to find this one?
Yeah. Every time it has been a totally different story of how I've just like happened upon this woman. But this one was thanks to my kids.
Oh.
This one was thanks. This one, it hit me over the head while I was doing hardcore mom life. And when I tell you who she is, you'll understand what that means.
Okay, great. Bringing up your kids, I'm almost finished, but so you have three young girls.
Yeah, three
daughters. And I read in one article, this is my questions to do with how you juggle it all. You were at the end of a book tour and you FaceTimed home at night. And your 8-year-old, who I don't know how old she is now, said, Mommy, you have to come home. We're falling apart here without you.
We're all falling apart without you. I was like, oh, cue the mom guilt.
Was Dad somewhere nearby?
Dad was on the FaceTime, probably be like completely agreeing with everything she was saying based on the FaceTime.
Yeah.
When did I write that article? I'm trying to think, but that's so funny. That was like burned into my heart.
Yeah, I saw it and then I tried to find it again and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But do you try to pack, like when you're do you try to pack everything together?
I do. Or like last week, it was their spring break and they had an event up in New England and we packed them all in the car and we brought them and we used it as an opportunity to do the Freedom Trail and the Boston Tea Party and have a quick little Massachusetts history deep dive because it's America 250. It's the 250th anniversary of the Revolution. If you're going to have a mom who's a historical fiction author, you have to expect your spring break to be a history tour. And so sometimes I bring them, sometimes I leave them. We've sort of learned that the sweet spot that I can get away with until I get the FaceTime that everything's falling apart is like 3 to 4 nights. And then I come home, get a little fix. And then, I have to just juggle it all the way any working mom does.
Yeah, no, impressive. And so just finally, have you read any great books recently that you can recommend?
Oh, yes. Oh, I love this because I'm always reading and I love historical fiction. I like as not only as a writer, but as a reader, that is my favorite genre. And I love the work of Marie Benedict. I love Fiona Davis. I love Stephanie Dray. Stephanie has a book coming next month called A Founding Mother that she wrote with Laura Camoy on Abigail Adams. And I learned so much. And it was a huge part of why I took the girls to New England is I wanted to do like an Abigail Adams American Revolution visit. But I just feel like it should be required reading this year with America 250.
Yeah.
I think we all need to know about our founding mother, Abigail Adams, because it was such a good story. So inspiring.
Thank you so much for today. I think it was really a fantastic interview conversation. I loved hearing you. All this fresh stuff was good. It really just complements the book.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Wowza. Allison is as inspiring as her characters. I love that she loves old stories, is a Swiftie, and is bored by the old trope of women being too beautiful and driving their men insane. As she says, we've heard it since time memorial. Wash, rinse, repeat. Boring. Well, It Girl is anything but boring. I highly recommend that you read it. And that is it for today. See you in 2 weeks.